Hi, I'm Tanya Hallett. I've been a teacher and trainer for over 20 years, domestically and internationally. I'm a specialist in trauma-informed practice, and now I just work in the space where I'm trying to encourage organisations to encourage positive mental health for all their employees and their managers as well. So I'm a mental health first aid instructor. I am a Lego serious play facilitator, which is always a little bit different. I speak conversational Japanese, which is something a little bit different and unusual. I lived there for 6 years, which is also unusual. And I've spent most of my life working with people from really severely trauma-affected backgrounds. And mental health has become a massive passion of mine. So that's me.
Welcome back to 50/50. I'm delighted to have Tanya Hallett with me today. Tanya very kindly recorded an introduction to herself, and we're going to put that at the start of this interview. But you know what I was thinking, Tanya? We're going to talk about lots of very useful, interesting things today. But you know what I was trying to think? We've met a couple of times for coffee.
We have.
But how did we originally meet?
Oh, that is a really good question.
What connected us?
I think it was a LinkedIn connection.
Okay.
And I have a feeling you reached out to me after. I think I may have posted something on potentially Gen Z.
Okay, cool.
And then you reached out to me, and then we met after that. I think that's what happened.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Got off LinkedIn.
I know. Well, we've had a nice time together in the couple of times we've met, right? And the work you do is really, really important. And look, I might be wrong, but it feels like it's not really a lighthearted romp kind of area.
No.
Right?
I love that you put it like that.
Yeah.
No, look, I mean, it's a deep topic, but I think it can be it can be done in a way where people can still. I actually think it's essential that when you do this type of work,
Yes.
that you still remember to have a laugh with it, because
Yes.
if you don't, it's like you're stuck down there in the weeds.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I actually think it's really important to bring lightheartedness to it at, where it's appropriate, and
Yes.
definitely like comedy where it's appropriate. 'Cause
Yeah.
people need a laugh. Yeah.
Well, it's true. And we know that even to learn things, people need to have some fun, right? So it's
for
like,
sure.
how do we bring that levity to this topic? So we're doing a bit of a teaser around the topic, but in your introduction, people will have heard a little bit about what you do. So the thing that I find fascinating is you've actually spent a long time as a teenage level teacher, haven't you?
Oh yes, many years as a teenage level teacher.
Right?
Yep.
So what a world.
And you know what? Do you know what I love about teaching teens? Now, look, I've got small children, but if I had to teach small children all day,
Yes.
my hat goes off to early childhood teachers.
Right.
It's hardcore. I can't do it.
Yeah.
I think why I gravitate so much towards teens is, it's not easy being a teenager, and we expect a lot from teens. So we kind of take them out of that childhood world. We shove them into high school, and we're like, right, okay, it's up to you to make these choices now, and it's up to you to make these decisions and start thinking about what careers you're going to have. And we start career planning in like year 9. We start looking at that for the kids. We're expecting a lot from them, but then we don't give them. We're not allowing them to be adults.
Yes.
We don't allow them to have huge amounts of freedom.
Yes.
But then we want to put adult expectations on them. And like I keep trying to explain to people, you can't do both. It's really unfair to expect both things at the same time and then not support them, because they're still kids. Their brains are still developing.
Yes.
They're still struggling with emotional regulation. They've got
Yes.
hormone changes. Teens have a rough time. And I know they can be difficult, but I
Yes.
love them. I do love them.
Yes.
I can't help it.
And I remember you saying one of the things you love about them is that they're real, right? They're
They're
straight
so
shooter.
real. So like if you if you want an honest answer, just ask a teenager, because they're not going to beat around the bush and make you feel better about your feelings. They're not terribly interested in that. They're happy to tell you straight.
Yeah.
But they're really empathetic at the same time. But if you ask them for an opinion, they'll give it to you.
Yeah, so this is fascinating, right? Because I really agree with young people being empathetic. So we'll talk about Gen Z today. And actually, of course, we're now heading into these, like my son's age and probably your little children's age. They're called Gen Alpha. But Gen Z are coming into the workforce and, of course, making more senior people's minds explode because they're not matching what the senior people's experience was. I always say to the more senior people, often Gen Z, sometimes baby boomer, but normally Gen Z, I go, these are actually your children.
Yeah.
So whilst you're complaining about them, you have created them, right? So there's a certain irony there. But the other thing is, I say to young people when I have the opportunity, I do one session a year at a high school and they're leaders from year 11 going into year 12. And I really love it for the reasons you're saying. They're straight. They don't give you anything unless you deserve it. But when they do give it to you, like if you say something funny, they'll laugh harder than adults. And when you ask them for a question about love or empathy, they're actually a lot more loving and empathetic than
really
people
are.
of my generation, right?
Really are.
So I think my generation, so I'm 51, Gen Z, somewhere probably in the middle of Gen Z, nice is nasty kind of approach. So lots of passive aggression, lots of, hey, how are you? And then gossip, not liking the person really, not really being caring or thoughtful. Whereas young people, I find they are much trickier for our or older generations because they're not doing the social niceties.
No, and this is because I love that you brought that up because I was going to say we had, I remember one particular year where there was a lot of conflict within a particular year group. And a lot of it was because the kids kept saying, well, she's fake, miss, and I don't put up with any of that. And he's fake and they're fake and I'm not putting up with this. And I was like, oh, okay. Like they're really into authenticity. They are incredible. Like they can smell out fake.
Yes.
And they don't like it. They've got no time for fake.
No.
And they really get cross.
Yes.
And so, no, they're not going to play the game and no, they're not going to do the two-facedness, which, I mean, I was, teen in the 90s. There was heaps of two-facedness going around, right? That's how it was, right?
That's how it was.
Air we breathe, the way we live,
right? Of course.
But they will not put up with that. They won't put up with that nonsense.
Yeah.
They don't like
and,
it.
Of course, bringing it into the workforce, it means that there's these young staff that have self-esteem. That's a big problem. We don't want young staff with self-esteem because then they ask for what they want. They won't just do whatever gig. And when, of course, the more senior people who've worked very hard for a very long time to get to the status level they've got to, whether financially or their position in the business, they don't know how to motivate the young people because the things that motivated them, i.e. money, status and fear, are not drivers so much for the children.
No, they're not. They're not. So it's really interesting. I was doing a class on leadership with some Gen Zs this week.
Okay.
And we were looking at, well, what do you think makes a good leader? And aura was one thing. I don't know if everyone's going to know what aura is, but aura is like I'm going to use another Gen Z word, your riz, your charisma. It's like, are you a motivated, big personality? Do you come across as confident, like you can lead?
Yes.
So they said that was important. They wanted that person who had that energy so that they'd listen to them, someone who was inspiring.
Yeah.
But the big thing that came up for them was compassion.
Yes.
Inclusivity.
Yes.
Were they honest? Could you trust them?
Yeah.
Did they listen to you? That's what's coming up for our Gen Z kids. They're not interested in... They are not motivated by fear.
No.
Fear doesn't motivate... Like I've been working with Gen Z and teens for a really long time, and I'm here to tell you, fear does not motivate. Fear's never... I think fear used to motivate people. It certainly doesn't work now.
No,
it's relationship. It is relationship. It is, do you care about me? It is, are you interested in what's good for me?
Yeah.
Do you want me to succeed? Do you believe I can succeed? That's what these people care about now.
And when I think about the people I work with, because I work at every level in organisations, and I think as you say that, no wonder the senior people are so triggered because they were scared, so they want the younger people to have the same experience. That shows respect. Then they don't know how to have compassion for themselves,
So
how they meant to give it to them. And then if they're not scared and they want compassion and they want the person to be honest, and a lot of time all the person's got is a facade of status and nightmare. When you and I met for coffee, I think last time I said to you, Tanya, there is such an opportunity for you. Both of the areas you work in, and when I say both, one's much broader than one, but in terms of this Gen Z stuff alone, I said to you, if I think of the clients that we have and the difficulties they have, your day-to-day, year-to-year experience of what these young people are and what they want, it's a real needed thing in the market. So for you as a business, it's fantastic to have something that people really need. It's a pain point, right? If you think of sales, pain sells. It is a big pain.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about it is us organisations still think that I don't know if they know it's a pain, but I don't know that they've quite realised they actually need to start getting help in for the pain.
You're right.
Because at the moment everybody's like, oh, surely this can't be that hard to deal with. And I'm like, well, everyone's struggling everywhere. So obviously it is that hard to deal with. So it's starting to, bring people in who've got experience. And I think this is the thing. There's a lot of people in education who've worked with Gen Z.
Yes.
And because my background's education, then I've worked with Gen
Yes.
Z. But in the corporate world or in the government world, most of these people have never really worked with teens.
No.
They haven't at all. So they've got very little concept of what drives them and how to actually, how to communicate with them and how to lead them. It's a very, very different thing. And, we've got the other thing we've got to remember is this generation coming through, they're far more complex in a lot of ways. So they're much more mental health literate.
Yes.
We've got, I think the statistics are something like 40% of 16 to 24-year-olds will be diagnosed with a mental health condition at some point, whether that's anxiety or depression or...
Yeah.
And we've got 30% of them with complex trauma.
Yeah.
Because of the ACEs, right, which is what we call... So ACEs, anyone who's into psych speak will know your ACEs are your adverse child experiences.
Yes.
So that's things like... having separated parents,
yes.
Growing up with generational poverty, growing up with mental health issues in the house or prolonged sickness or lack of education, lack of resources, anything that sort of puts pressure on a family.
Yes.
When children have sort of 3 or more of them, they're far higher rates of complex trauma. And our rates of family and domestic violence suggest that we've got a lot of kids coming through. And anecdotally, I can tell you that there's huge amounts of kids coming through with complex trauma. And because they're like that, that means that it's even more crucial that it's relationship first.
Yes.
And it's authentic and it's trust and it's honesty, because those kids will not work for someone who treats them poorly.
Yes.
They won't.
Yes.
They are not interested.
No, they're not. And when I think about your teaching career, part of it at least has been in a school with very, very high levels of these issues that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So as I think about the kids that you're helping or dealing with, and then I take children perhaps not in such circumstances but with some combination of those things, then you've got your staff members going into whichever company they're going into. You know what I think about when you talk about it? When we think of our generation, or you're younger than me, and then there's my parents' generation, trauma would have been going on the whole time, right?
Trauma's been around
Forever.
for the days of old. Yes.
Okay, so let's help
there.
the oldies understand, and I include myself in this, right? If I think about my parents would have had a harder time than I've had. Sam would have had, I'm hoping, a less hard time than I had. But there's 2 sort of separate questions here. One is, have these traumatic events got worse in society, or has it been that because our coping mechanism is not just to shut that shit down and never talk about it again, is it noisier in society? What's actually happening?
Such a good question, because a lot of people are asking this kind of question, like,
Yeah.
we've never had trauma. I'm like, yes, trauma's always been there.
Yes.
So it's actually a mix of both. So
Okay.
we've got 2 things that are happening. The one thing that's happening is the people who were part of like the older generation, so like our baby boomers, for example.
Yes.
There was trauma from the world wars for a start.
Yes.
And those traumas existed, but they were suppressed.
Okay.
Which is why you had people having mental breakdowns. So, for example, and I'll use my family's example. So, my grandfather, great man, worked as a stretcher bearer in World War II.
Yes.
He was a managing director at age 23 of all these companies. He was like incredibly smart business-wise, incredibly intelligent, very, very gifted, very talented, very young, very ambitious. He had a mental breakdown, which the family sort of talks about as, oh, well, that's when Grandpa had his breakdown.
Okay.
And Grandma went back to work to keep us all in private schools.
Okay.
Was the line that my family sort of says. And it's like, okay, so how many people have got that story in their family where they've had that person they've had their breakdown? The breakdown's suppressed trauma. So breakdown is essentially, not always, but often, it is a post-traumatic stress reaction. And this is the other thing that's important. Trauma doesn't mean PTSD.
Okay.
Those are 2 different things.
Okay.
So that's also really important to understand.
Yeah.
Trauma is any incident that is unexpected.
Yes.
where often your life is threatened or the life of someone you care about is threatened,
Yes.
the incident is out of your control. That's how we know what a traumatic incident is.
Okay, that's great.
Now, 75% of Australian adults will experience at least one traumatic event in their life.
Yes, I would say that would be high.
That's
With that
it's
definition,
really high.
it's really high.
It's really high.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's trauma everywhere,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Post-traumatic stress disorder is when the effect of the trauma that you have experienced lasts for more than a month.
Ah, okay.
Right. So that's when it's like, you're not, you aren't recovering after that month. Things could be getting worse for you.
Yes.
And that's when people get very unwell. And post-traumatic stress disorder is where you've got people who will often struggle for a really long time. And you can get, and I mean, I've had PTSD, so I do know what that's like, and I'll talk more about that later. But that's an experience of really being very, very unwell, and it really affects your ability to function in basic day-to-day life stuff.
Yes.
Now, trauma itself exists.
Yes.
So sometimes people will have a traumatic incident, and a few weeks after it, they've kind of, they're okay. They've gotten over it, and there's a lot of different factors as to why one person might get PTSD whereas another person won't. But I think the levels of traumatic incidents make a difference as well. But really what we do know is the earlier the intervention after whatever that event is, the better the recovery, and the less likelihood there is of developing much more complex mental health conditions afterwards. So if there's early intervention after an incident that is upsetting, then people have got a much better outcome.
Yes, that makes sense to me on a few different levels. I can imagine personally, people older than me, younger than me, how things have been dealt with, and how in some cases with people younger, where I can think of one person I was able to help where we really dealt with it at the time fully, and I was shocked how quickly they recovered. Because of the not trying to suppress anything.
It's the suppression part. So it's really interesting. I was talking to a friend about this the other day, and we were like, our parents' generation who, I don't know if you've heard of this, but the parents in the 80s, the benign neglect, when you were parenting sort of, but, your kids would leave the house and come back at 6 o'clock when the street lights went on. Like, was anyone really watching any of us? But the parents in that time, I was talking to a friend about this, and she was like, well, look, we were taught conditional love is what we were taught.
Yes.
We were taught be good girls and boys.
That's right.
Otherwise, you're not worthy of love, and you're not worthy of being supported, and you're not worthy of asking for anything.
Yes.
So that's not a way to develop healthy relationships or healthy self-esteem.
No.
So this sort of this sort of trauma that's run underneath the surface for many, many years has affected like my parents. Oh my gosh, if they walked into a psych's office, they'd never walk out.
Oh yeah.
My goodness.
No.
Like, and the unhealthy sort of attitudes towards different things, which they got from their parents. Like it just sort of follows down. And yes, we do have more complex issues in our society now as well. So we've got for example, the incidence of family breakdown is a lot higher. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that just because you're from a divorced family or separated parents, that's going to cause intense trauma you can never recover from. I'm not suggesting that. But we do have more of that, which does add an extra stress.
I can hear a couple of things. So tell me what's right or wrong about what I'm saying as a lay person. When I think about this older generation that had a lot of stuff happen and they just locked it down however they could, they'd have their one breakdown in their life often, and then ongoing seemed to survive. Often there was alcohol, cigarettes. More interesting drugs didn't seem to be so much on the cards. Lots of Valium. Lots of gin. Bex and a good lie down.
Oh, Bex and a good lie down. Bex and a good lie down.
Yeah, right?
Yep.
So how I connect that is if I think of people that are older than me and that walking into psychologists, really most of them would rather die than walk into the psychologist, let alone start to unpack that box. So we're shutting it down, right? Then we take those people and make them senior managers and they're shutting it down. Then we have our young people going, I'm not shutting it down. What a trigger, man.
What a trigger.
Because to be able to really care for those people, these people really have to look at what's going on for them. That is terrifying to the point of with people that I've dealt with, I would say there are people that simply cannot start to look at what might be in the box. I can't look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, how do I not be opinionated, egotistical, status-driven about, well, you young effers just need to behave yourself and understand how we work here.
Mm-hmm.
It's very tricky, right?
It's incredibly tricky. I mean, this is the interesting thing. So when whatever trauma-informed training I do, I always start with, in any situation, it's your emotional check-in first.
Right.
Right? So, for example, one of the courses I teach is trauma-informed practice in practice. And that starts with, where are you at?
Right.
What's your check-in? What's your baseline today? How are you feeling today?
Yes.
Because it's actually important that we do reflect on that before we, jump in to try and assist other people.
Yes.
Now, the problem that we've got is, I think we've got a lot of people in management, especially if they're older, that are in management, who are kind of like, well, I never had to deal with any of this nonsense.
No.
Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, all right, fine. But really, what the younger generation particularly, what everyone's looking for is emotionally intelligent leadership.
Yes.
And that starts with you actually looking at yourself.
Yes.
And this is really something that everybody should be doing. And if you're too scared to look in the box, then there's a real problem there.
Right.
There is a real problem there. And like I say to people, you can suppress it for as long as you like, but it will come out in other ways. The body will keep the score.
Yes.
So I went to Gabra Mate. He was here this week.
Yes.
And I went to his talk on, a lot of it's about the impact of trauma on bodies.
Yes.
And things like, so for example, women, they think that 80% of people with autoimmune disorders are women.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is probably because women spend a lot of the time suppressing feelings
Yes.
and being nice
Yes.
and doing what everybody wants
Yes.
and putting everybody's needs above their own.
Yes.
And they're getting sick from it.
Yes.
And then you've got men, for example, high rates of heart disease because they've got stress in their bodies. They're not learning how to deal with it in an appropriate way. And it constricts your blood vessels. It heightens your blood. It will get you in other ways.
I know.
So if you don't want to look in the box, that's okay, but the box is still coming for you.
It's still coming for you.
It's still coming for you.
The thing is, as someone that I remember I've shared on here before, I remember when I was younger and I've had a history of anxiety and depression. I've got a level of trauma in my background for sure. I used to say there's a part of my brain that I was scared of. I knew there was trouble in there. Mm-hmm. And it was true. There was a lot of trouble in there, right? But for whatever reason, whatever my nature is or whatever my joy of life is or whatever I'm lucky enough to have, I was like, nah, I'm going to work through it, right? Because I want to feel free and I want to be loving and all the rest. And now I can say I honestly don't fear any of my mind, right? But when you first go to open the box, like there's two sayings I love. One's mine, not mine, but one where I heard, when it's behind you, it's a tiger, and when it's in front of you, it's a kitten.
Oh, I love that saying.
Yeah.
I'm going to pinch that one.
Pinch it. It's not mine. Pinch it.
Oh, thank you.
I love that one.
That saying.
And the other one, Peter Slocum shared here actually, the walls of fear are paper thin. So, but it's a trap, right? It's a trick. You think, if I look at this part of my ego, I'm going to die. I remember sharing a story in terms of handed down ego or handed down personality style. I'm all right, Jack. I'm tough. I'm the best. All of this stuff. When Andy and I, my husband, were first going out, I did something and offended him, and he said, I need you to apologise. This is such a crazy example, but it's exactly what I'm talking about. I was like the Fonz, if you're old enough to know my reference, where he couldn't say sorry, right? He used to go, Anyway, Andy said, I need you to apologise about what happened. And I go, I can't. And he goes, what are you talking about? I go, I can't say sorry. And he said, what do you mean? I said, honestly,
I physically can't do it.
I feel like I will die. And I'm literally saying it out loud because he made me safe enough to explain my crazy. But it took me forever. I can do it now because I'm practiced. But it was so hard to say sorry. I felt like if I don't keep my position in this argument,
I've lost, I'm weak, I'm a failure.
I'm going to die. My ego was like, don't apologise whatever happens. Isn't that fascinating?
It's really interesting. Well, actually, Japan was like that. So when I lived there, one of the things they never liked to say sorry was a really big deal.
Okay.
Like you said sorry when it was nothing big.
Yeah, right.
Like, sumimasen, I didn't mean to bump into you, or, that part was okay. If it was just sort of surface sorry, that was fine.
Yes.
But nothing like I've done the wrong thing and I'm now losing face and it's sorry. And they won't do it. It's a very it's often, I see that through the Asian culture.
Yes.
It's that kind of this inbred idea, like not to ask a question, don't say you don't know.
Yes, that's
and
right.
don't
Strong
say
one.
sorry.
Yes.
Very strong.
Very strong.
Very
yes,
strong.
Yes to everything.
They're cultural imperatives, what we call cultural imperatives, that people that have been passed down to us, often from parents.
Yes.
And we've internalized it as truth. Like, this is how we have to behave.
Truth. That's right.
We do.
That's right. And so, when we think about these managers or people who are working with younger people and they're scared of their own stuff, or they haven't looked at their own stuff, and then they really actually... So if I have a bee in my bonnet, and I've talked about it on here because it's a real bee, it's this topic with people where people are not treated respectfully as humans in organisations. I'm not going to take up your interview with me yelling at you for half an hour around my passion around this.
Yeah.
Quote unquote, see previous episodes. But this lack of humanity to people, leaving them in limbo. If there's a redundancy, not telling them dates, giving them a special project role, which is the same as being fired, but they don't want to fire them, whatever it might be, right? Just inhuman. Even the fact I've started going now, so look at me like and go, stop now.
I can see your passion. Keep going,
I was just going to
Tam.
say, the fact that human resources is called human resources, like they're not iron ore, they're humans. The fact we don't even think about that title.
I know. Actually, very good point. I actually love that point. You're absolutely right.
Human resources. Who's that there? It's one of our human resources.
Yes. It's HR. Just go to HR. They'll deal with it.
Go to HR and they'll deal with it. So my point is, one, I like to get that anger out because it helps my own
Fair
healing.
enough.
But
I validate your anger.
Thank
you make
you.
a really good point.
But the second thing is, actually, there is a moral question to being a leader. If you can't deal with your own shit, are you okay to be leading people?
And you know what? I love that you've said that, because essentially this is the thing. Like, and I think this has probably come from teaching teens, right? I will not ask them to do things or lead their life in a way that I won't do myself.
Okay.
And it's sort of like, it's that double standard, isn't it?
Yes.
So we're expecting, I mean, if you're someone who hasn't dealt with your own emotional regulation, then if you're expecting your staff to be able to emotionally regulate,
yes,
then you actually need to model emotional regulation.
Yes.
And if you can't do that, then how can you expect it from your staff member?
Yes.
So in class, so when I teach the teens, it's like, I am not going to, when I speak to them, I'm always respectful. I always use manners, because if that gets lost and those kids speak back to me, and one of the things I can say is, I speak to you respectfully.
Yes.
I'd like the same back, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And we actually have to, this is how good leaders model. They will not ask people to do things they're not prepared to do themselves.
Yes.
And they will not criticise people for doing things that they can't do.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
And it's actually, I love that you've made that point, because we've honestly got too many people who are walking around in leadership. I've worked for so many leaders that are shocking.
Oh, yeah.
We all have. I'm sure we all have. We've all got stories.
I think most people would say they've had one great leader in their career. It'd be more like that than I've had a dozen and one was off. Most people say I had one good leader in my career.
This is the thing. Like, I'm actually struggling to think of when I've had good leaders. I've had leaders who have taught me things.
Yes.
I don't know if I've ever worked for someone that I would have said were great.
Do you know what? When I think of my favourite leader, this is so fascinating, connected to this topic. My favourite leader was not a good manager. There was a lot of things they did wrong. The reason I consider them a good leader is because I felt emotionally safe with them.
But and this is the thing, that's actually, and this is what I keep saying to people about psychological safety.
Yeah.
It is absolutely critical.
Yes.
You've got nothing if you've got an organisation or a team where people are too scared to talk to each other or too scared to speak up when there's a problem. Feeling emotionally safe, or like psychologically safe, is absolutely crucial. There is not enough emphasis being placed on that. If you've got a team or an organisation where people don't feel psychologically safe, just watch how I keep hearing people talk about their drop in productivity. I'm like, what's your climate like? What's your climate like? What's your psychological safety like in your workplace?
If you will have probably seen it, the massive Google study into this, number one outcome of team productivity,
Mm-hmm.
not kumbaya hug sessions, productivity was psychological safety.
Psychological safety.
And I was talking to a senior manager the other day with one of our clients, and we're talking about we coach people there, and she said, sometimes I think that, what you're really doing is really just supporting them, counselling them because they're struggling. And I said, yes, I think often I am doing that. And I said, I'm very happy, and I hope you agree that that is a good outcome if the people who are working with them as their managers are not providing the care they need. I talk to people and it's an active worry how upset they are and how little access they have to someone that is actually human with them.
That is human with them. Because this is what I've said when people say to me, well, what is trauma-informed practice? So I'm just segueing into this because I love that you've brought this up. And when I talk about trauma-informed practice, people go, well, tell me what it is. And I'm like, okay, well, the pillars are safety, trust, collaboration, choice, and empowerment. They're your pillars of trauma-informed practice. But basically, it's like having a master's degree in emotional intelligence.
Yeah, right.
It's knowing how to be a human.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
So, I mean, this is what completely shocks me about, these multi-billion-dollar organisations that walk around. I'm like, you've got no concept of how to actually be a human.
No.
But your people are your resource.
Yes.
And you don't know how to treat them.
No.
This is a huge issue.
It is.
And, learning how to be a human and offer basic emotional intelligence should not be that difficult.
Yes.
If it is, you've got a lot of work you need to do on yourself.
Yes. Right?
Yep. Absolutely.
And when I think of one of the clients we work for, we're actually kind of like a ninja provider because one of the managers has a level of emotional intelligence, saw the difference we could make versus your more cookie cutter professional. We are professional, but we're lovingly professional, right? So this particular manager said, you guys do things a bit different, and we are in this organisation, but absolutely surrounded, both in the L&D area, but also within the more senior staff, absolutely surrounded by, as one of our guests, Cindy Kennedy, said here, highly intellectual people with no emotional safety,
intelligence and no
right?
emotional safety.
Yep.
Yeah. And this is the thing. I mean, people forget that, intelligence, and this is one of the things, again, you learn in the background of education. People have multiple forms of intelligence. You've got your academic intelligence, you've got kinesthetic intelligence, you've got your logical intelligence, your creative intelligence, emotional intelligence.
Yes.
And sometimes you've got people working in organisations where they've got like logical intelligence, technical intelligence in space.
Extraordinary.
It's extraordinary. They're incredibly bright.
They are incredibly bright.
Except that they don't know how to have a conversation with their teammate.
So
And they don't know how to communicate.
The thing that's interesting to me, having not had any real background in trauma-informed, apart from brief conversations with you, is it does actually sound like if you want to be a trauma-informed practitioner, you need to be a psychologically safe, caring human being.
You absolutely need to be. Well, you really do, because
as a baseline,
the people, and this is the thing, right? So the people that go into, the people that are very passionate about trauma-informed practice are often people who've either had traumas in their past that they've experienced, so they understand what it's like, or they've worked so much with trauma-affected people and they're doing the best that they can to give a better outcome for those people. Right. So as a baseline, I think you do need to be a reasonably good human. Yeah. And you need to actually, I think you've got to legitimately and authentically care about this. Otherwise you've got to walk this walk. Like, there's so many, there's a lot of companies out there that'll be like, okay, this is trauma-informed practice. I'm like, great. Tell me how it applies in practice, because that's what people need to know. Yeah. They want to know exactly what to say and exactly what to do. And we've got people out there talking about the theory of trauma, which, don't get me wrong, we need to understand how the brain works and how the amygdala works and how our stress responses work. We do need to understand that. But what we do need to know is, okay, when that person's escalated or when that person's in crisis, how do I now apply my trauma-informed practice to assist that person? Yes. And what I find is a lot of courses stop there. They kind of don't give them that. And I'm like, well, that's not helpful.
That's the thing, right?
That's the thing. You need the tools. You need a toolkit.
Yes.
And the toolkit could be really simple things like validating how someone feels.
Wow.
I can hear that you're really upset. If that happened to me, I'd be upset too. There we go.
Wow.
Not hard.
No.
and we would say, well, an emotionally intelligent person could do that. But actually, I think we've come to a point in our society these days where I can't point out that many emotionally intelligent people.
No.
Like, I can't. I think we've lost it.
Yeah.
And, or maybe we never had it. I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm honestly trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm so passionate about this is two reasons. So one of them is, in 2015, I lost my son. He was stillborn at 9 months. And I really learnt what it was like to experience, A, intense grief,
Yes.
and B, guttural trauma. It was a horrendous incident. I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to upset listeners because it can be a triggering topic for people. But it was horrendous. The whole experience itself was horrendous, and I had been fobbed off and invalidated by the medical profession the whole way through the pregnancy when I kept speaking up saying I felt something wasn't right.
Oh, wow.
The way the birth was dealt with, because you have to give birth at 9 months. That was dealt with. The nurses were incredible. The nurses, who were incredibly trauma-informed, did a wonderful job. Okay. But I found out later I had to fight with management because they wanted to put me on the labour ward with all the other women who had live babies and thought maybe that would be appropriate.
Oh, my God.
But what I found later was the way people responded to me after that event was sometimes I couldn't get over what people said. And I tried, and I had to be really careful because so many people said things to upset me, and I was like, I had to actually step back, as emotional as I was, and go, I'm trying not to wreck my friendships with these people. I'm trying not to wreck my relationships with these people, but all I want to do is crack them in the head.
Oh, wow.
Because they'd say things like, well, I guess God just had another plan for you. And I'd think, no, not the right thing to say right now.
Oh, my God. Your control was extraordinary.
And I remember thinking, oh, gosh, I'm going to have to step back. I even remember, I will share this story.
Okay.
Now, I will share this because this is a perfect example of trauma-informed practice.
Okay.
So I had to cremate my son because you have to actually organise a burial.
Okay.
Or you have to do a cremation. And I didn't think we could go through the funeral. I couldn't do it. I couldn't go through the funeral process and have a coffin and couldn't do it. So I wanted to have his ashes and I wanted to have him cremated. So I had to go to a funeral home. And I remember doing all this emailing at this time. You've just lost a baby.
Yeah.
And you then have to go through this process. And anyway, ashes, he was cremated. The funeral home called me and said, okay, the ashes are here for you to pick them up when you're ready to come and pick them up. I said, okay, fine. So I go to the funeral home to pick up the ashes. Now, the lady I'd been dealing with was out on another engagement. So I guess there was another funeral, there was something, and she'd had to go out. And the lady who saw me at the door, this is a funeral. I can never get over this.
Yes.
And she opened the door. I rang the bell and she opened the door and she looked at me and was like, oh, hello. And I said, oh, hi, I'm Tanya Hallett. I'm here to pick up my son's ashes. Oh, I was really hoping I wasn't going to have to see you. And I said, I'm sorry. She says, oh, what happened to you was so awful. I was really hoping I didn't have to meet you. And I'm going, oh, geez, I'm so sorry to put a spanner in the works of your day.
You poor thing.
I'm really sorry, but I'm here. And she goes, okay, well, you better come in. And so I'm just like, okay. So I walk in and they give me the form, and the form you have to sign, the relationship you have to the person whose ashes you're picking up.
Yeah.
And I had to write mother, and it was one of the first times I'd had to write mother. And I had to write, and then I burst into tears. Yeah. And I'd kept it together so well up to that point, but I really cried and was really upset because I had to sign the word mother. And she goes, and I can see her visibly like, oh. And I'm looking at that, and they were in this really small, a really small box. I was very, very upset. And she was like, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of the other lady. I said, I really wish she'd been here because, she's been dealing with you and it's just awful. And I didn't want to have to do this.
Yeah.
And I'm going, yeah, well, I didn't want to have to do this either, sweetheart.
I think I win in this.
I just, when we're looking at horrifying
Yeah.
situation. Shall we compare notes?
Yeah.
And that's when I was just shocked. And I had lots of other things that happened during this time of what people would say. And I'd think, oh my gosh, like, what is wrong with people?
Yeah.
Or they'd be like, well, do you think if you had a different obstetrician, you would have had a different outcome? Or do you think if you'd done this, you would have had a different outcome? I'm like, this is not helpful dialogue.
No.
All you have to say is, this is really awful. This has happened. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's all you have to say.
Yeah.
And I couldn't deal with my own head.
No.
And I went back to work quite early because I thought I can't deal with this. And I took I was working at a part-time working at a primary school, and I ended up deciding to go full-time working in a really tough school because I thought, I'm here, I've got no baby to look after. I need to honour my son in some way, so I've got to go out there. I've got to do good. I've got to do something. Otherwise, I'm going to make myself crazy. I've got to find a purpose.
I can feel it. Yep.
And so I went back to this school. I'd been doing bits and pieces of work at this school, but they were like, well, we know this is a really awful time, but we have a vacancy. Would you like this full time?
Yeah.
I thought, I'll give it a shot. Anyway, the kids at the school had known me and they'd seen me pregnant.
Okay.
And one of the boys yelled, he was this lovely boy. He was in their industry program, really nice, like lovely boy, tall, like walking around his industry gear with his, steel cap boots, real tough, lovely boy. It was a lovely boy. Miss! I'm like, yeah, hey, mate. And he goes, how's your baby? And I said, I lost him. And he said to me, what? And I said, I lost him. But you were really pregnant. And I said, yeah, I know. But are you, can I swear?
Of course.
He goes, are you fucking kidding? I'm like, no, mate. And he goes, that's fucking awful, miss. I can't believe that fucking happened to you. That's bullshit. And I was like, that is the best response I have heard this whole process.
Yeah.
And that's what I realised when I worked at this school, because a lot of these kids had traumatic backgrounds, but they had trauma intelligence.
Yes.
So what they understood was, this was a bad thing. I can't sugarcoat. There's no way of sugarcoating this for you. This sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I needed. And those kids were the only people I could stand to be around for about 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, I can understand. So that story, when we first met, we talked about it, and the level of devastation is so big that I think what happens for people that aren't young and honest and willing to be authentic is, as the person hearing, you freeze in,
You do.
I want to say exactly the perfect
right thing.
I am devastated for you. I cannot believe this. You immediately think, what if it had happened to me? When you said about the guttural trauma, you can feel it in your body, and then you go, I don't want to say the wrong thing. And then I think people either quickly go to a solution, some solution like God had another plan, what a nightmare, or go to probably what I tend to do, which is to try and beam empathy and care and not say a lot because you're so scared. Like that boy going, that boy, that is fucked, ma'am. That is fucked, miss. Weirdly for me, it ties into the thing we were talking about before, the lack of freedom to access one's own
emotion.
True, right? Mm-hmm. Like if one accesses their true emotion, you would go, that is the worst thing I've ever heard. I'm so sorry. I can't imagine going through that. So let's say that was in my mind today, and it was in my mind last we met. I can't believe that happened. I'm so sorry. That's the worst thing I've ever heard. I wish that had never happened for you. How does that land for you?
But that's a beautiful response. Because for me, that's a response with someone that goes, I'm connecting to the emotion of that. Yeah. I'm anticipating. I can't understand exactly what that devastation is like, but I'm empathetic enough to imagine the level of what it would be. That's one of the worst things I've ever heard. I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
Because what you've actually done, and what people don't understand, is after there's been a traumatic event and someone's really upset, you're validating their feeling. Yes. You're not validating the situation. You can't solve what's happened because it's already happened. Yes. What you can do is validate that person's feeling. Yes. And that's a really big deal, and people forget that. And traumatic invalidation, which is what a lot of people have when they come forward and they talk about things that were upsetting. Yeah. The response of people, if it's dismissive, is sometimes it just adds to the trauma of the initial event.
That's right. It makes it worse.
It makes it worse.
Worse. So when I said what I just said, I think, okay, what's the fear in saying that? The fear in saying it is you think, if I get this wrong, I'm going to make it worse. I think there's two misunderstandings there. One is nothing's going to make it worse.
No.
You couldn't come a millionth of a percentage to competing with the actual experience.
No.
But it also takes a vulnerability to say that and risk getting it wrong, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And that's why I tried not to, slap people in the face.
Oh, you're really wonderful.
Because I kept thinking they're doing their best.
Yeah,
they're trying.
very
and I knew
kind
they
of
were
you.
trying.
Yes.
But the thing is that what we've got to understand is when people have gone through tragedies or really big events, you can't fix it.
No.
You can't fix it. It's happened. And unfortunately, this is what we do, right? We like to go, okay, here's the problem.
Yes.
Let me find a solution. Let me fix this for you.
That's right.
Well, a lot of the time you can't do that.
No.
And that's also part of when people, and that's another part of trauma-informed practice, is accepting that you can't change what's happened to a person. The only thing you can do is validate that what they went through was a horrible experience.
Yes.
You're sorry that they went through that experience. Yes. And how can you support them now?
Yes.
That's what and this is why I keep saying, with trauma-informed practice,
yes,
there are steps. Follow the steps. You're not going to go wrong.
Yes, and that's the beauty of the support. So this is what you can offer, right? So in your profession and what you can do with organisations. So your business is called Trauma-Informed
Practice Training.
Trauma-Informed Practice Training. So you have someone like me, I have good intentions, but I think, what if someone comes to me with a story that I'm not experienced in, I don't know what to say to? As you can tell, I'll tend to go quiet rather than the platitudes, because I know the platitudes aren't okay, but then I'll go, if I say what I think is sympathy, that might be worse. So with someone like me, you can come in and go, all right, Tamara, if you're dealing with a staff member in this situation, this is what you do. Exactly. And I've got support for how I can. So even if I'm actually not particularly emotionally intelligent and you help me with the training, I can go, look, I'm not going to look at it for myself, but I know for you, I'm going to be validating, I'm going to be open, I'm going to be respectful.
This is the thing, right? And I love that you've brought those points up, because this is where I talk about when I talk about trauma-informed sexual harassment and sexual assault disclosure. Yes. People don't want to touch it either.
No.
I don't want to say the wrong thing. This subject could be triggering for the person themselves.
Yes.
And they don't want to know there are really simple steps that you follow. So the first thing is listen. Like you said, you listen. You shut your mouth as best as you can and you listen. And you say, okay, tell me more. All right, so I'm hearing you said this. Is that right? Okay. Yeah. Then you validate. That must be a really awful experience. I can hear that you're really upset about that.
Yes.
And then you're going to safety. So safety is, what can I do right now?
Right.
To help support you in this space, right? In what adjustments can we make for you? And you also do a mental health follow-up, and you follow the steps. So there are steps, they're so easy to follow, and you check back in at the end.
Got it.
And it's not hard to do any type of, and this is the thing, organisations everywhere, no matter who they are or where they are, people are going to go through events. So grief is the other big one.
Yes.
That people go, I don't know what to say.
No.
And it's okay, so this is how you talk to someone who has just lost someone in a tragic, horrible way, or if you lose anybody, it's still grief, right?
Yes.
And you need to be able to have that discussion, right? And how do you do it? And these aren't difficult. There are simple steps you follow. Listen, validate, safety, mental health support, check back in.
Right.
So easy.
And
if you're someone who is like, oh, I don't really want to have these emotional conversations.
Yeah.
I'm not a counsellor. I don't want to touch this with a 10-foot barge pole.
Yes, that would happen a lot.
I get those feelings, right?
Yeah.
I validate the people that are feeling that way.
Yes.
Because to be fair, these aren't conversations you have every day.
No.
And we're actually not trained to have them.
No.
So to be fair to those people, every reason for you not to be comfortable with that conversation. But what you can do is I understand you're not comfortable having that conversation, but what if I gave you a list of steps and gave you words to say in each of these steps and gave you suggestions?
Yes.
And what if I did that, and would that help you?
Yes.
And most people will be able to go, yeah, okay, I can follow that.
Yeah,
I can
that'd
follow
be
it.
awesome.
I can follow those steps.
And also, if I think of, say, a position where someone's a team leader or supervisor, it might be the first person the person approaches. If they're able to follow the steps, but then they know their guidelines for who else can support. So is it the next leader up? Is it human resources? Is it the counsellor? What is it that they can do if the person needs more time, more expertise? But they're not starting off with, you said when people react badly to trauma, it can add to the experience of trauma.
It does, yeah.
I was talking about it, it's never really a joke for me. It's always so painful. But Danielle on our last Friday 50-50, we're talking about, if you pick the wrong person to talk to.
I can already feel where this is going.
Right?
Yes.
And you feel so much worse for raising it. So you raise what you're worried about, then they give you a terrible response, either a quick fix that isn't, or I'm glad I'm not you, some combo of those two.
So helpful, thank you.
So you feel ridiculous, right? And if you think of some of these very serious topics, if someone goes to the wrong person for support, they could end up in a much worse situation.
They absolutely can. And I mean, this is why I keep saying to organisations, especially if you're the sort of person, so people, for example, people in safety, people in human resources, people who are supervisors, people who are leaders, people who are managers, if people are coming to you and they're having to talk to you about events that have occurred, whether that's an incident at work or an incident at home or whatever's stopping them from coming into work, for example, you absolutely need to know how to respond to that.
Yes.
And that means that virtually everyone in an organisation needs to be trauma informed, from the colleagues to the supervisors to the managers to human resources. Everybody needs to know, what are the steps I follow? How do I have this conversation?
Yeah.
Because the difference that makes for the person who has said something, because often if people are really upset about something, they're already upset. So when they've come to you, they're already escalated.
Yes.
They've already stewed on whatever it is that's upsetting them.
Yes.
Or it's a horrible event and they're having to tell you about it. They're, having to say, well, for example, I need to take a week off work because my mother just passed away, for example.
Yes.
They're already upset. The incident's already occurred, right? And your response to that is really crucial, because the other statistic I was seeing was something like, 70%, I don't know if this is right, but it's some really high percentage, it was over half, of people who have been bereaved at an organisation, like a really, something that was unexpected, a really tragic loss, will not return to that organisation, largely because the way that they're spoken to upsets them so much they can't go back.
Yes, adds to the grief.
It adds to the grief, and it makes them feel like they've just lost this person in their life who meant so much to them, and then their workplace has acted like they couldn't care less. Now, that may not be how the workplace is feeling, but they don't know how to respond.
No, they don't know how to respond.
No, they don't.
But it's interesting, because if people are following these trauma-informed practices, you're actually going to find the culture of the organisation would largely become safer.
Yes, of course it
in
would.
general.
That's the whole point.
Right.
You're absolutely right, and thank you for bringing that up. That's absolutely right. I mean, look, the measure of an organisation, I think, is, it's like when people say, how do you know who your good friends are, right? And they're the people who stick with you when the shit goes down.
Yeah.
The people who are by your side, the people who are seeing you through your worst.
Yeah.
An organisation that has a bad thing happen to within it or happen to the people there, this is when you're going to show yourself what sort of organisation you are.
Yeah.
Now, if you are empathetic, if you are supportive to your employees,
the
loyalty that they're going to have for you after that it far surpasses, anything that you could get any other time. Like the thing about adversity, while adversity is not nice, it is the time where you can have extreme growth, and actually you can forge incredibly positive relationships out of adversity. There's a lot of positives from adversity, but it's about how you respond to the adversity. Yeah. And this is an example. This is an opportunity where your organisation can show what it's made of.
Yeah.
What kind of place are you?
Yeah.
So it's an opportunity for people to make themselves that good place, because what will happen is everyone will talk, right? And everyone will be like, oh, you know, oh, they were so good to such and such when such and such happened, and they did this and they did that, and they were so lovely and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Oh, I work in a good place. I work in a place that cares about me.
Yes.
I work in a place that supports me. The culture shift, the change that has in people, the safety that adds to people.
Yes.
The trust, the collaboration, the impact, that's massive.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to map all of those things out. I mean, you can look at your little stats and your productivity and your levels of resignation, but the stuff that you get from doing things from an emotionally intelligent perspective and looking after people's mental health and considering the impact this has is huge. It's immeasurable.
I remember reading a thing about, you know, companies always create culture sentences, mission, vision, culture, behaviours, values. I've seen a couple. I know of one that actually is workable. It's very clever. It's 4 words and it works and it's clever. It's very unusual that it's in the marrow of the organisation. But I read a fantastic thing and it said culture isn't what's on the plaque on the wall. No. It's how people feel on a Sunday night.
Exactly. And you know what? That is so true, because if you've got people... And, you know, if you've got people who are dreading going into work on a Monday morning and on Sunday night they get the anxiety, that's a really good example. You know, aside from the, oh, I'm sad the weekend's over, because that's normal for everybody. Like, no
There's
one's,
the difference
you know,
between, I got work tomorrow and,
I've got work tomorrow. Yeah, and we've all been there. We've had those feelings. And it's awful, and it's that feeling in your stomach, and it feels like your stomach's liquefied on acid. It's just dreadful.
Horrible.
And, you know, that's about culture. That's the culture of an organisation. And that's about the safety. I mean, see, I do Lego series play, and a lot of the Lego series play I do is all about building psychological safety.
Yeah.
And
Lego series play. I did one session to learn about it, and then I attended one session where you could do it. And I thought at the start, I have no idea how this is going to work. And then at the end, I found it very good.
Isn't it incredible?
Yeah, I really like what I made and what the meaning of it was, and I learnt a lot from doing it.
So, you know, I must say, disclosure, I hate Lego. I actually hate Lego. I can't build stuff. I get really impatient, but I love Lego series play, because what I found is when you put the bricks out in front of people who are also not the type of people who'll talk, but they'll build. Yeah. They'll build, and then they'll talk about their build. Yeah. And that gets people sharing and talking about what's really going on for them. Yeah. But Lego series play is really interesting. So like an example is when I start workshops in those, I have rules, and the rules are that, you know, everybody must participate. You share what you're comfortable sharing, but you must participate. Yeah. And if you don't want to share, then you can say, thanks, I'm done sharing. And it's all about being kind to yourself, and it's all about doing, you know, and listening to people and talking about the build, not the person. Like, there's so many things that we can do in organisations to create psychological safety. But, you know, you've got to create a climate where when things go bad, people feel they can talk to you. If they know they can't, how have you got a psychologically safe environment? No. And if there's an incident or a traumatic incident that's either occurred in your personal life or something's happened at work, for example, you've been harassed, sexually harassed, or you're being bullied, and you go forward to talk to the manager, and the manager goes, oh, are you sure that it's really that bad? This is not helpful. No. And this is not adding to... You know, this does not help people recover. No. It means people will start looking for the back door to get the hell out, because you're not there for them at all.
And I can feel, as you say, it just makes it worse. I can think of people that have been through like things like that I've observed, and my own experience, and it's like that not being heard. You know, you said people get into trauma-informed practice because they've had a different experience and they want to... I think about the coaching I do or the work I do, and so much of it is just about people being seen and heard, because it hasn't been my experience. Exactly. So I'm like, Tanya, tell me all about it. And then, you know, acknowledgement, recognition, I see you, because of the healing of just that.
Just so interesting you said that, because it reminds me that when I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I was diagnosed with PTSD after I was in a... it was a really, really violent work incident where I was essentially held hostage in a house with someone alone for 4 hours. Yes. Waiting for emergency services to arrive. The person I was with was very mentally unwell, and had gone into full-blown psychosis. It was very dangerous. At one point, she was holding my head over live electrical wires that were sparking while she was throwing water at them. And anyway, it was very scary. I had my kids were really little then, and I thought, I'm not going to make it home. I'm not going to make it home. And when I had nightmares, because often with PTSD you get the nightmares and the flashbacks, and I'd have all these nightmares. And the nightmares were always about me saying, it's not safe, and someone going, nah, it's fine, you'll be right.
Ah.
And
So it wasn't about what she was doing.
No, it
was
wasn't.
about...
The nightmares were always about, and they were random. They weren't, like sometimes the person who had done this to me was in the dream, but they weren't doing the same thing. What was happening was, it was me being forced to do stuff and me going, this isn't safe. We can't do this. It's not going to, we're unsafe. It's not safe. And people going, oh yeah, you're okay. Get on the plane. You'll be fine. Then the plane crashing.
Yes.
And I said to my psychologist afterwards, I said, well, I had this dream and I don't understand why I'm having these dreams. And she says, well, don't you see the common theme? And I said, no.
Yeah.
No. Of course I don't see a common theme. That's what you're going to tell me.
That's right.
But I was like, no, I don't see the common theme. And she sort of said, well, this is about you not being heard. Yeah. Because what had happened was in this incident prior to it, for the few weeks prior, I had said to this organisation, we are not safe.
Yes.
You need to have two of us on.
Yes.
There are other issues here we don't know about. This is not, we need to really be watching us. I don't feel comfortable working here. I don't feel comfortable doing this shift. I don't feel comfortable, blah, 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 blah. And I was completely like, oh, it's just her settling down. Oh, it'll be okay. Oh, it'll be all right.
Yes.
And I had been invalidated that whole time. And then all my nightmares were related to me going, no, we can't do this because something awful is going to happen, and them going, no, you'll be all right, off you go. And then something would happen and we'd all get killed in this dream, or we'd have a plane that would crash or, and I'd be thinking, why? These don't connect. And the psych said, well, yeah, they do.
Of course they do.
Because it's all about you speaking up and not being heard. So exactly what you said.
Yes.
Very traumatic.
And as we're talking about this today, and it's a little bit like being a trauma-informed counsellor and going, don't make it too much about you because it's making me remember things, right? But when you say there's the trauma, actually, if I think for myself of several different things, the reaction to it was what caused the problem, not the trauma.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like I say to people, look, your wound is not your responsibility, but healing from it is, right? And I say to people, what's happened to someone is not your responsibility. You can't go back and change it. But you responding and supporting that person, that's your responsibility.
Yeah.
You making that effort so that you've responded in an emotionally intelligent way that will help that person, you're responsible for that.
Yes.
You can't fix what's happened.
No.
Right? And
that's what makes people, like you said, when they feel like you're hurt, they go, what's the solution? What's the neat outcome? God must have meant that. It's like the not being able to be with the lack of control, that they can't help you, but also their own discomfort in not knowing what to do to make it right.
And you know what? Sometimes, and I love that you said that, because a lot of this is about, it raises our own discomfort. And you know what?
Yes.
Sometimes you got to sit with that. And I hate doing it.
Yes.
Right? Like, no one likes to sit with uncomfortable feelings.
No.
You don't want to sit with uncomfortable feelings. It's like sitting on a cactus. No one wants to do it. That's horrible.
I get why people are trying to avoid it.
Right? I get why you want to avoid. Absolutely. Except that sometimes we do. It's like, you know, you have to brush your teeth even if you don't want to, for example.
Right.
Like, you have to do stuff even when you don't want to. And sitting with uncomfortable feelings when someone has disclosed to you about something that's happened to them, that's on you.
Yeah.
You do have to sit with that.
Yeah.
And no, you can't solve it. You can't go back and change the death of that person, or you can't go back and change the incident, but you can control your response to it.
That's right. And what I love about this conversation is we've talked about how people can have a look in the mirror and look at, can they be more emotionally intelligent? Can they face some of their fears? Can they break down some of their ego? But also what you can offer to organisations or to leaders is they actually don't have to do that as much as be willing to follow workable, proven steps.
Process.
Right?
Yeah, because the biggest thing I get from people often is, I'm not a counsellor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not asking you to be.
Yeah.
And when we take disclosures from people, I'm not a psychologist. Like, I've done a lot of study in psychology.
Yes.
And I know a lot about psychology.
Yes.
But I'm not a psychologist, right?
Yes.
But that's not what I'm asking people to be.
No.
You still need to employ the psychologist to help counsel the person through the process. I'm not suggesting leaders, team members,
That's right.
and people all jump in and go, right, we're now psychologists for our organisation. That's not the suggestion. But there are steps, and one of the parts of the steps that you follow is encouraging that person to seek appropriate mental health care.
Yes.
And that's when you go, okay, I'm supporting you as best as I can.
Yes.
I'm not a counsellor, but someone else who's got the skills and the capabilities can help you through
that's
this.
right. Like, I'm a coach, I'm not a counsellor or psychologist, so I say to people, if I can hear we're getting to a point where it would be a counsellor's or psychologist's expertise,
then that's what I'm going to recommend you do.
Yeah, I'll say, listen, I can help you, but I think at this point, this element would be better served by someone with the correct quals, the correct experience. And that's a beautiful thing for someone that is worried about working in this area, is knowing I don't have to be a counsellor. You can even hear it in the tone of your voice when you say, I'm not a counsellor. You can actually hear people's fear coming across as anger.
And you're right, it comes across as anger, but it's fear.
It's fear.
And I get that, because people are seeing these all as the same things. And I'm like, no, they're different. I'm not asking you to counsel a person. I'm asking you to follow these steps, which is all about you being the conduit between the person being in trouble and them getting help.
And you know what? If I think of some of the older, more stubborn people that I know, they'd be like, oh, bloody hell, everyone's traumatised these days. That's fine.
I've heard that as well.
We're all traumatised. We were never traumatised in our day. It's like,
you were.
Sixth beer for the night, but anyway.
Sixth beer for the night, exactly.
But I know there's no issues there.
No issues.
But the thing is, even with all that going on, they can be that, do that, and still follow the steps you're going to offer.
Exactly.
Right?
Absolutely. This is me basically saying to people, you don't have to be scared of this.
No.
I'll show you how not to be scared of it. It's like one of the reasons I love mental health first aid as well, is because there's step by step by step. So an example was when I did my mental health first aid instructor course, I think the week after I'd had 2 conversations about suicide with people.
Yeah, right.
Straight afterwards.
Yeah, wow.
And afterwards I was talking to a couple of my friends and they said, oh my God, are you okay after having that conversation? I said, yeah, I followed the steps.
Yeah.
I followed the steps. That's it. That's my job.
Yeah.
My job is to do these things.
Yeah.
I've checked in on the person. I have suggested where they should go. I have listened. I have validated. I have offered support. I have done all of those things. Now that person needs to go and take control of the situation. And that's what trauma-informed practice is about. It's not about us racing in with our white horse and waving our sword in the air. This is me riding a horse.
I get it.
Okay.
I could feel it. It's good.
In case it didn't come across.
No, it came across. I mean, it won't come across on audio.
It won't come across on audio.
Which is a mistake I often make.
Oh, yeah.
So imagine a sword in Tanya's arm and then her holding onto the reins. It was very real.
I was waving it
with
very...
a sword and
very
riding the horse. Yeah, you could feel it.
Yeah, it's not about you riding in on the white horse and solving everything. This is about you coming in nicely, calmly, and going, okay, this is a really bad thing that's happened.
Yeah.
How can we support you? Do you have here are the numbers? Like, I always say to people, it's actually really good to have the numbers of all the different support lines.
Yeah.
So have the Lifelines number, have Beyond Blue's details.
Yeah.
1-800-RESPECT if it's anything to do with DV or sexual violence.
Yes.
If it's to do with infant loss, there's SANS. If it's there's lists of different lines people can call.
Yes.
And then if that fails, have you made an appointment with your GP?
Yes.
Do you feel like you need to make an appointment with your GP, see if they can set you up with a mental health care plan?
Yes.
If you need to take time off for an appointment, let me know. I'm more than happy to work it into the schedule.
Yes.
All right? That's what managers are expected to do. I'm not expecting you to unpack someone's childhood trauma.
No.
Understand there's potentially trauma and you need to be careful with it. That's there.
Yeah.
But I'm not expecting you to run in on your white horse and fix all of these things. That's not what we're asking you to do.
No.
But responding is not that hard.
No.
But there's steps. If you follow the steps, you'll be right.
So if you think most people have a good heart, if you think whoever the person is, if they can access their good heart and follow your steps, then they've done their job.
Yeah, they have.
So all they need to do is not put up their egoic barrier, not put up there was no trauma in my day. They can think all those things, access their heart, follow your steps, and they'll have someone have a better outcome.
Absolutely. It'll be a much better outcome for everyone involved, the organisation, the manager, the team, and
I was going to say
most
everyone.
importantly, the person that's actually affected.
Yeah, that's so cool. Okay, so if people want to access you and want to use your services, Gen Z alone, I think there's so much you can offer people there, and you and I have spoken about that. Then the trauma-informed practice side, is there different workshops? How does it work?
Yeah, so I've got different workshops for different things. So I do trauma-informed practice in practice, which is to teach people about trauma-informed practice and how to use that in their workplace, and a lot of that is also learning how to respond to aggressive or escalated behaviour. How do you stop someone from reaching crisis point, and if they are at crisis point, how do you apply emotional first aid and co-regulation strategies?
Awesome.
So that's what I do, and it's practical. I do obviously look at theory in these, but theory's not what people need. They need some of it, but what they need are actual practical tools. So I will give you those.
Yes.
And tell you what to say and tell you what to do, because that's what people need.
Yeah.
So I do trauma-informed practice in practice. For people who work with children, I do understanding complex trauma and responding to complex trauma, which is really good if you're working with young people. I think that's actually really good if you're working with Gen Z as well, but it's also good if you're working with kids, like little kids.
Yes.
Understanding and responding to PTSD, which is really important because how PTSD is often really misunderstood. So I talk to people about how to respond to that. What tools can they use? What are the signs and symptoms? Again, what do you say? What do you do? I do trauma-informed sexual harassment and sexual assault response, which I'm finding is crucial for certain sectors.
Yes.
The resources sector's got issues with this. The military sector's got issues with this.
Yes.
The law sector's got issues with this. There's issues everywhere,
Got
right?
it.
And I also do the other thing that I've got a lot of people reaching out to me for is managing burnout and vicarious trauma.
Oh, yeah.
Which is massive because we've got a lot of organisations who are dealing with other people's trauma, but then they've got to learn how to look after their own mental health. How do they protect their own space?
Yes.
How do they protect themselves? And how do they recognise signs and symptoms of vicarious trauma in themselves? So people who are in HR, people who are in safety, people who are in management. Because if you've got people dumping their stories on you all the time, it's unreasonable to expect that it's going to have no impact on you.
Yeah, I think I need to come to that one.
That one
could be useful.
That one is also because that's very much in the psychosocial hazard sphere. So, I mean, all of these are psychosocial hazards, right? Trauma is a psychosocial hazard for everybody. But employees knowing how to deal with it, respond to it, and protect their own mental health against it is actually crucial. It is also legally required. So I'm doing a lot of that. And the other thing I do is Lego serious play. So in these trauma workshops, I use elements of Lego serious play so that you can kind of really engage with the topic, but you have like a third space.
Yeah.
Like what we call in therapy speak, it's like a third space to play around with. I also do team building workshops and emotional intelligence leadership, and I do all of those different courses. So I do lots of different ones.
Yeah.
It's all trauma-informed practice based, but it's always and strategy planning, which people like to use Lego for as well.
Yeah,
That's being used in Europe and all over the world.
Yeah, I can imagine that actually, because one of the things Danielle and I have been talking about is Steve Biddulph and Martha Beck's work on the left and right brain and the power of the right brain and how our society is very left brain based. But actually, I can imagine with the Lego serious play, one of the elements would be the engagement of the creative right brain, right?
Well, the cool thing is with Lego serious play is people just start building. They're not overthinking.
No.
So you've given them a question and they're building around a question, but they're not having time to overthink it because the builds are short. They only go for a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
So you don't have people thinking like time to logic themselves out of it.
Yeah.
And then they'll sit back, they'll look at their piece and they'll have to go, oh, well, actually,
what did I
the
mean by
insights
that
you get out of that are really, in depth.
Yeah.
Because you've shut down that part of your brain that filters.
Yes.
And that's why it's actually incredibly useful for team building as well, so people can really see like what's important to them.
Yeah, that's what I found. I was surprised by what I'd built. So I just built it. Not a lot of, I felt like I'd be nervous because I didn't want to get it wrong or make my one look good, all that. But actually I just built it, and then, what I was able to get out of it, Ian Gilchrist out of the UK that's done all this left-right brain, he's famous book is The Master and Its Emissary, and the master is the right brain and the emissary is the left brain, who's meant to follow the right brain. We've all got a bit confused and turned to the left, but the Lego reminds me of you create the piece, right? That's the master, and then what did I create is the other part. Super useful.
It's incredibly useful because it's just... And this is the other thing we've got to remember as well. We've got to really, we've got a neurodivergent workforce.
Yeah.
And the other reason I use Lego Serious Play is because that's also really good for engaging people who are on the ASD spectrum, people with ADHD, because they like to be physically engaged doing something.
Yes.
They're often also highly kinesthetic learners, so they want to do things with their hands. So it's there's many reasons I use it, but it's also to create that space and allow people to access parts of their brain and thinking that they may not realise are there.
Yeah. And the thing I love is you're talking about areas that people would think of as soft, but actually you can hear your compassion, you can hear your experience, but actually it's very practical, very
incredibly
down to
practical.
earth, but you can hear in your tone of voice, like, you're not mucking around.
No.
You're not there to waste anyone's time.
No, I'm not there to waste people's time.
No.
This is the thing, and this is also, again, coming from an education background, teachers are busy. We don't have time. If we have to go to training, it better be bloody damn well useful.
I know.
Do you know how much teachers hate sitting there?
PDs.
The PDs.
I could get my mum in, she'd talk about it for an hour.
Right. And if it's not useful, it's a waste of everyone's time. I'm not interested in wasting people's time.
No, me neither. Testify.
No. Absolutely.
We walk to the beat of the same drum.
We do.
What haven't we talked about that you had hoped we would?
No, I think we've talked about. I feel like we've talked about a lot.
Oh yeah, it's been good.
It's been epic.
I think it's been really good.
Like epic. It's not just good, it's bloody epic.
Do you know, you express yourself like I would if I took the lid off of it. You're sort of, I can watch you and go, that's what I'd do, but I kind of dial it back a bit. That's awesome.
Maybe I should learn to dial it back a
bit.
I just
Danielle's going like this.
Oh, good.
So
Hurrah.
she's very happy.
That makes me feel better.
No, don't dial it back.
Oh,
I meant it as a compliment.
Thank you.
It's like, I really like it. I would do a lot more of that. That's awesome. It's because of my previous trauma being told I'm a bit much.
Oh my gosh. Hard relate, Tim. Hard frigging relate.
You've had a better recovery. We'll talk offline.
That was epic. I love that.
That was a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I had the best time.
I'm very glad.
Pam. You're a legend.
Cheers.
Thank you.